Good morning and welcome everybody. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, for joining us as we launch today the third edition of the World Observatory for Subnational Government Finance and Investment. We have an exciting program for the day ahead of us with an interesting lineup of speakers. And without further ado, I would like to start by inviting Mr. Yoshiki Takeuchi, Deputy Secretary General of the OECD, to the podium, as well as Ms. Emilia Saiz, Secretary General of United Cities and Local Governments, UCLG, to the stage to deliver their opening remarks. Deputy Secretary General, the floor is yours.
Secretary General Saiz, Excellencies, distinguished guests. It is my great pleasure to open this conference and launch of the third edition of the World Observatory on Subnational Government Finance and Investment. As the world grapples with overlapping crises and worsening economic outlook, we must recall that global challenges and mega trends have local impacts, and they also demand local solutions. Regions and municipalities are often on the front line of the response to crisis. During the pandemic, subnational governments have been the front line of managing the crisis, as they are responsible for the critical aspects of contention measures, healthcare, social services, economic development, and public investment. But they are now confronted to new challenges related to the energy crisis, the inflation, wars and conflicts in different parts of the world, including Russia's invasion to Ukraine. Subnational governments have provided essential housing, health, and social services to the refugees. They also provided support for citizens indirectly affected by the conflict through the cost of living inflation. Subnational governments also play an important role in responding to long-term megatrends, such as climate change and digitalization. They already account, on average, for 69% of climate-related investment in OECD countries, and they can help connect communities that would otherwise be left behind by the digital transformation. But to play this critical role, subnational governments need the fiscal space and the frameworks to support and invest in their communities. The World Observatory supports policymakers by providing evidence to track these efforts and the tools to improve them. The Observatory has been a collective effort led by the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities, and United Cities and Local Governments since 2016. I am proud to say that this is now the largest international database on subnational government structure and finance. It covers dozens of indicators on subnational expenditure, investment, revenue, and debt. And as of 2020, for now, over 135 countries are involved. It shows that around the world, subnational governments are now responsible for more than 20% of the public spending and 40% of the public investment. Beyond the fiscal data, the World Observatory is an incredible source of qualitative information with 135 countries' profiles. These include unique information on territorial organization, decentralization and territorial reforms, subnational government responsibilities, fiscal reforms, and fiscal rules. And today's launch conference is an excellent opportunity to discuss the latest trends and key findings of the third edition of the Observatory. How to improve the financial resilience of the subnational governments to external shocks, as well as the role of property taxes and access to external finance for subnational infrastructure investment. These topics have been a priority for the Indonesian G20 presidency this year. And we are proud to develop a toolkit in partnership with the Asian Development Bank in support of this work. This was the first time the important role of subnational governments was recognized at this level. To conclude, let me warmly thank United Cities and Local Governments, UCLG, our co-founder of the initiative, and our partners for their support to this third edition of the Observatory. In particular, to the ADB, the French Development Agency, the Development Bank of the Council of Europe, the DLOG Network, the UN Capital Development Fund, the German Agency for International Cooperation, and the French Ministry of European and Foreign Affairs. I would also like to thank all the OECD delegates from the Regional Development Policy Committee and all the experts from countries, associations of subnational governments, and institutions. They help us collect and review this huge amount of new data and knowledge on multi-level governance and finance. At the OECD, we will continue to develop our data, analysis, and network to support policymakers at all levels and their ability to take local actions that tackle global issues. I wish you all a very productive discussion today, and thank you very much.
Yes, so I give the floor to Secretary General Emilia Saiz.
Well, thank you very much. What a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you. Thank you for welcoming us here at the House of the OECD. It's a great pleasure for us to join once again. And I heard my dear good friend Lamia saying to me, it's the first time in 5 years. It's a long time not to be together. But we have kept working, and we have kept gathering information. We have kept using the information that we had, and we have been comparing this information. This is what the observatory is about. It's not only about the dry data, but we are more and more trying to ensure that we interpret this data and that this data can be used by our constituency, local and regional governments around the world, but also by national governments and international institutions to actually better understand where we are. And where we are is not easy times. We are going through hardship. And we are at a place that we probably did not expect to be for so many different reasons. As Deputy Secretary General, we are going through many different types of shocks. And those different types of shocks are ones that will necessitate us doing things differently. And we will need to share that with the citizens, but we will also need to share that in the different spheres of government. One of the key findings, and I know we will be introduced to the main findings by Lamia later in the program, one of the key findings is actually that no matter how well you're doing right now in the world, how evolved your democracy is, there is not enough funding to do what we want to do, and the funding does not come from the right places, and we are not using the resources in the way we should use them. And public service provision, particularly at local and subnational level, is underfunded, full stop. That's a reality. This despite of the learnings that we have done, and particularly throughout the pandemic, where everyone, every sphere of government and every citizen understood that they were there at the front line. They were the carers, and they were the ones that were taking care of those that cared for us. The public service provision personnel, the staff, they were there. They kept our water running, our lights still going on, our waste was still picked up. We still could go to places if we needed to. All of those people around the world are dependent on subnational governments that had to invent new policies, that had to find new resources, even if the resources were not there. And now we are back to a square, not one, but -1. We find decentralization going backwards. We find centralization again. And we are still not making it possible for subnational governments to actually enhance the resource revenue so that they can face the difficult challenges that citizens have, not only local governments, because it's about the citizens. Okay, it's a grim picture, but there is hope there, because it is, and we have seen this throughout history, It is in towns, in cities, in regions where creativity has always thrived, where the genius of people flourishes, helping us shape our streets, our culture, our societies. And it is very important to remember that there is a great link between the ongoing consent of those that are governed and the legitimacy and strength of the government. And I say that here because the financing that we would like to foster or to promote, enhance local and regional government financing for public service provision, is a type of financing that would not make sense if it was not accompanied by freedom, by agency, by empowerment of citizens, and strong democracies. And democracy right now is at a crossroad. So for us, the work that we do with this observatory is extremely critical to reaffirm some of the bases of what government needs to be in the future, how we need to rethink the governing structures and mechanisms. Some of the key findings of the observatory are around this. Governing in emergency, like we will need to do in the coming years and decades to come, will not be possible if we don't change the governance architecture at all levels. And we have seen all systems fail also during the pandemic, the decentralized and the centralized one. The decentralized ones because there was lack of coordination. They might have been more efficient in some aspects, but it was very difficult to know who was taking what decision when. Well, that will need to change. It's what we call governing in partnership. We will need to redefine that. And centralized states were simply also not efficient because they might be able to get certain things to places, but the distribution of those facilities were lost and they were not efficient in that way. So what we are doing here together is giving ourselves the information to judge where we are and to give ourselves tools for that difficult conversation that we need to have with all spheres of government about what it means to govern in emergency, the new models that we need to develop, and above all, the type of investments that we need to make in public service provision, in public expenditure, and in public investment. That's what this observatory means for us, and this is why we cherish our partnership so dearly. And I would like to thank all the partners for the work that they have done with us. It's not easy to cover 135 countries, 93% of the world. Data is not there. It's hard to get that data, and it is people that are doing this job too. Thank you to all those teams that are behind the work, and I very much look forward to the follow-up conversation about the findings, but also our expectations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you both, Deputy Secretary General and Secretary General. We can now, I think, crack on with the opening session. To present the highlights from this third edition of the World Observatory, I am very pleased to invite Ms. Lamia Kamal-Shawi, Director of the Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities at the OECD, to the podium for her keynote speech. Director, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. Deputy Secretary General, thank you so much for being with us. Secretary General, dear Emilia, distinguished guest, indeed, it's the first time we are meeting together since almost 5 years in person. I know that Dorothée told me there are also more than 150 people following this conference in Zoom. Plus, we are in direct in our YouTube channel. So I'm really delighted to be with you to highlight the third edition of the World Observatory on Subnational Government Finance and Investment, the WOFI. I'm always laughing when I say the WOFI, and I said I'm always telling to people, it's not the name of a dog. It's the name of a very, very important tool. And as the Deputy Secretary General has just highlighted, a combination of megatrends and shocks are putting the global economy under severe pressure. Subnational governments have been on the front line, and the situation, unfortunately, continues to worsen. For subnational government, higher rates of inflation and rising borrowing costs have been and will continue to put further pressure on finances already squeezed by the pandemic, which in turn put pressure on their ability to deliver essential services and critical investment, and in particular, those that are crucially needed to drive inclusive digital and green transition and deal with future shocks. Now we are living in a multi-crisis world, unfortunately. So this reinforces the need to better understand the fiscal frameworks and the fiscal space that are available to some national government. And this is what the WOFI is about. The WOFI is really a formidable tool intended to help address precisely all these challenges faced by subnational government. Great, it works. So let me first tell you because many of you know the WOFI, but many are new. What does the WOFI actually offer? So together with the UCLG, we joined forces since 2016 to create the WOFI. The OECD has been engaged in this area, but covering just OECD countries. And when we see the number of countries that we are covering now, I think we have to express our deep gratitude to USC, but especially to Emilia, because this started with people all the time when there is a partnership. So we started to join our forces in 2016, and now we can say that the WOFI is organized around 3 pillars. First, a unique, and I would say the largest global database that provides standardized, reliable, and transparent access to data on subnational government structure, finance, and investment. And this database comes with a visualization tool to compare countries with each other. So there is here the link. I really invite you to have a look. It's really fun. And you can see the amount of data that you can find is just amazing. So the second major part of this WOFI is country profiles. You can find a lot of information there for all countries, 135, for instance, on their territorial organization, institutional frameworks. You can learn about the size of municipalities there, the institutional reforms, regional and local mergers, intermunicipal cooperation, the question of decentralization or recentralization. It's really comprehensive. So I invite you also to have a look. And finally, as the third pillar of the WOFI, a synthesis report. Here is it. There are a lot of copies. You can take one. We regularly produce, a report that helps to synthesize, the information in order to identify common challenges in subnational finance, which now I will draw on the remainder of my presentation. So all these tools are means of supporting international dialogue. This is what we're doing today, but also decision-making on fiscal frameworks and helping capacity building, which is crucially missing in many parts of the world. The WOFI data is also increasingly used. We have seen that in many countries and in cities and regions to monitor the contribution of subnational government to the SDGs. So in this slide, we can see that actually that with this edition now, we can say that WOFI has become truly global. We have more countries from Asia, Pacific, Africa, the Middle East, and West Africa, 135 countries, unitary, federal, and now we cover 90% of the world surface area, 93% of the world population, 94% of global GDP. We have data for more than 664 subnational government worldwide. So it's big, huh? And as you can see from the chart, this country, of course, they have very different territorial organization. We have, for instance, 38 single-tier countries, all of which are unitary. Iceland and Israel are examples. 61 two-tier countries, out of which 47 are unitary country, like Korea and Peru. 14 are federal, Australia and Mexico, and 36 three-tier country, out of which 28 are unitary and 8 are federal. Why I'm mentioning that? Because it's important for countries also to compare themselves with similar type of institutional framework. Big diversity, of course. So let me just flag some of the key findings. First, our data tell us that subnational government remains very important actor in total public spending. In 2020, for instance, subnational spending accounted for 21.5% of total public spending, 8.3% of GDP. This is an average across all countries for which we had available data, 122, which is really great when you have 135. So congratulations, Dorothée and Isabelle and all the team, of course. In terms of volume, this is slightly more than 2016. There is a slight increase. But with the pandemic, of course, much more spending from the central government. So in relative terms, it has slightly decreased. But again, there are huge differences between countries, as you can see in the chart. For instance, while in mainly developing countries, some national spending accounts for less than 5% of public spending, we have countries like Canada, but also Denmark, for instance, where it accounts for more than 60%. So large diversity again. And as a general trend, we find that in federal countries, subnational spending accounts on average for more than 40% of public spending. In unitary countries, it's less than 20%. We also find that high-income countries tend to have a larger share of subnational spending than in low-income countries. Well, that's quite obvious to understand the reason why behind this. On this slide, we can see the critical role played by subnational government in delivering the services, something that Emilia pointed at, these services for which we all depend on. 20% on average go to education, 16% economic affairs, including transport, 11% on social protection, 10% on health, 8% on housing and community amenities. So when there is unfunded mandate, you understand what it means for your life as a citizen. Another important figure, most of subnational expenditure is for current operations, 77% on average, as capital expenditures represent less than a quarter of their total expenditures, which leads to my next point, the question of investment. So what the WOFI also tell us is that subnational governments are critical to investment. In 2020, they accounted for almost 40% of total public investment in the world. If we take just the OECD countries, the data is 55%. And again, of course, there are large country differences. We have seen that in 14 countries, some national government accounted for more than 65% of public investment. And this is the case of Spain, your country, Argentina, and Canada. But some national investment is very low in some region, in particular in Africa, where actually it accounts only for 24% of total public investment. I say only, but it's still quite big. So now let me turn to the question of the impact of COVID-19 on subnational finance. I think there are dedicated sections in the report. We wanted to see what has happened and how countries reacted. Of course, some national governments, they were on the front line, but this led to increasing pressure on spending at a time when revenues, including from taxes and user charges and fees, were falling sharply. And as you can see in the chart on the screen, between 2019 and 2020, expenditure increased by 2.6% in real terms on average, while taxes and user charges and fees fell respectively by 5% and more than 10%. So big scissor effect happened. And there are many examples, actually, of cities that suffered during this period from a loss in user charges and fees resulting from the closure of public facility, museums, swimming pool, reduced demand for some of local public services again, you know, the fees, public transport, school meals, car parks, etc. And to compensate, of course, we have seen upper levels of government, especially national government, using emergency subsidies. And the WOFI shows us that grants and subsidies, actually, they rose by more than 10% in real terms on average for 61 countries, keeping subnational afloat. So, of course, this was very much welcome. We have seen that in the short term because of the pandemic. But over the long term, there are significant risk building, and there is an urgent need to strengthen the resilience of subnational finance. Grants may fall due to fiscal tightening, and in many countries there is uncertainty about prospects for local taxes and user charges, but there is also uncertainty about the take from property tax when teleworking has put pressure on commercial real estate values. And we have seen, of course, there are risks on the spending side, inflation, big risk. So to build a resilience, there is a need in many countries to diversify. Diversification of subnational revenues beyond grants, especially more can be done to expand tax revenues, only 14.5% today. And in the report, we discussed that in a comprehensive way with a dedicated chapter on the question of property tax that really merits more attention, largely untapped. So new revenues will not only help build resilience, but also support needed investment. I mentioned that. Subnational investment is really impressive as a proportion of public investment, but still very low. Everybody knows about the investment gap. So this is a big issue. This will require new revenue. We have been talking about that for a long time as part of the WOFI. We talk a lot about how to leverage private sector. She told me that to go back. Here we are, thank you. But now, what we discuss in this report is the possible new flexibilities. For instance, in some countries, with the right supporting framework, checks and balances, there is scope to leverage on debt financing. But we are very cautious, of course, about that. And these are all key elements of the new G20 OECD policy toolkit to mobilize funding and financing for inclusive and quality infrastructure investment that was just endorsed by G20 finance ministers and central bank governance, I think 10 days ago. So there is, of course, much more in the report. I invite you to have a look. Coverage of the territorial dimension of recovering plan. Special chapter dedicated to the 31 least developed countries with a focus that is being developed thanks to the help of UNCDF. Where is David Jackson? Thank you so much, David. And of course, there are new focus on subnational public-private partnership, green budgeting practices. I mentioned already property tax, thanks to GIZ. I don't know where is the representative of GIZ, but big thanks. Let me conclude by, again, thanking all the WOFI partners, Agence Française de Développement, the Asian Development Bank, the Development Bank of the Council of Europe, the German Cooperation, the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, UNCDF, and the Dialogue Network. Thank you so much. I'm now inviting you to have a very quick look at this very short video to show you how you can use the WOFI. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Director, for your insightful presentation, and also thank you for this video. I hope many of you will be looking at the resources that we have for WOFI. This leads us smoothly, I think, into the first roundtable of the day. That will be, I think, an opportunity to reflect a bit more on the key findings of the third edition of the World Observatory. And the roundtable will be moderated by Emilia Said, Secretary General of the UCLG. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I've got an easy job because I have a great panel to enlighten us with some thoughts. So I'm going to start calling you to the podium, and I would invite you to start there. I'm calling Carlo Monticelli, the Governor of the Council of Europe Development Bank. Welcome, Carlo. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Francisco Safi Gatica, Ambassador and Permanent Representative to the OECD from Chile. Marie-Hélène Loisson, Deputy Director General of the French Development Cooperation Agency. Asma Ralou, Mayor of Rabat and UCLG Treasurer, part of the UCLG Presidency, recently elected. Congratulations, Mayor. Thank you for being with us. And David Jackson, Director of Local Transformative Finance at the UN Capital Development Fund, a very important partner for us. And David, going to do a change here. There you go. Practical arrangement. Well, this is the panel that we have. As you can see, a very diverse group of partners that are going to be providing their first impressions on the findings that Lamia has just presented. As she was saying, I mean, the observatory is huge. The data that is gathered is enormous. And what she has given is a very preliminary overview of key findings. There is much more to seek there. But let us start with this first impression. And we are going to do this in two rounds of questions. And we are going to start with a first round where we're going to focus on, how do you see the findings and the work that is done around WOFI, our observatory, in supporting the work of your organization? Basically, the question is, what does it mean to you? And I would like to start with you, Governor, Mr. Monticelli. What does it mean for the work that you are doing in the Council of Europe Development Bank?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Thank you very much for having me here. It's quite exciting to have the possibility to discuss this report. Thank you for breaking the ice and call it WOFI. So we are, now feel easy to use this acronym. Now, the Council of Europe Development Bank has been supporting WOFI since its birth. Why? Well, for two reasons. The first one is that it is providing a fantastic global public good in terms of making available an instrument that can be used by a variety of users for benchmarking, for improving the effectiveness of action. And the second reason is it is very, very useful for the work at the Council of Europe Development Bank. And why is that? Well, this is straightforward. We are the only multilateral development bank that has as unique mandate the focus of supporting social investment. And most of the social investment is done through local authorities. So in a way, the basic rationale is really very, very straightforward. And I can elaborate a bit more on that. First, in terms of quantity. In the last decade, the Council of Europe Development Bank has provided resources for some 13 billion to local authorities. 8 of them directly, 5 of them through intermediaries. And in a situation where, as we have seen for previous presentations, resources are very scarce, our contribution is quite significant. And the second reason is qualitative. If we look at the breakdown of the sectors where local spending, local investment went, the pie chart that we saw before, well, you see that more than 80%, I mean, looking at of the type of spending just falls within the core mandate of social investment of a Council of Europe Development Bank. So there is a nearly one-to-one mapping. And indeed, in the latest technical brief that we published from communities' vulnerabilities to resilience, the background offered by WOFI in terms of data analysis has been crucial for this report. So to wrap up, it's exciting for us to be partners in this exercise. This exercise is useful to many actors, indeed very many actors. We are one of them on a variety of dimensions, as shown in the latest piece of research that we produced, and of course in our day-to-day activity.
Thank you very much, Governor. It's very encouraging to see how such an institution can use this data. But it's also very interesting that you're bringing up this issue on social investment, because some of the findings that we have found are also that local and regional governments, subnational governments, are using their financing to mainly put that very much in motion, because they are having the competencies around education, they are having the competencies around health in many cases at regional level, but also social services. So in the second round, we will talk a bit more around that. Allow me now to go to Ambassador Safi Gatica from Chile. Chile is a country that is going through important reforms in terms of decentralization. I was just meeting with the newly founded Association of Governors from Chile, and one of the first items on their agenda is financing. So I'm not going to put you on the spot. I'll do that a bit later. But I want to ask as well, how does it feel for you that this work that we are doing, you are part of the steering committee, so what is from your perspective the value of this work? And let us remember that the contribution of the member countries of the OECD is extremely important for our work, and so is the contribution of our own membership of local and regional governments. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emilia. I would like to start by thanking Lamia and her team for the invitation, and congratulating all the institutions that are related to the WOFI. I think as we saw in the presentation, it's quite impressive the amount of data and the work you've done. So thank you all for your very useful work. And as Carlo was saying, this is a very important public good that for sure will be of help for subnational governments and all of our countries. I believe that there are two aspects to consider from the Chilean perspective, at least, about the WOFI. The first one, and this is quite evident, I think, is the evidence and the consequences that it may bring for the evaluation on the policies we are trying to put forward. The second one is the comparative approach. To compare yourself with other countries is always good, I think, when you're trying to find a benchmark. And WOFI provides information about different systems, institutional systems, and put numbers on how they work. And that is very helpful for countries that are trying to bring change and that are trying to compare themselves to improve. So in the case of Chile, these two aspects are of great value. As Emilia was saying, we are struggling to make changes that will bring decentralization to our country since some years ago now. And the information provided is crucial for what we are doing, or trying to do at least. And it shows a way in which we can move forward, and I hope you come back with some questions regarding the changes that you were presenting, at least in the case of our country. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador. We will do that certainly in the second round, because it is very linked to the possibility also of subnational governments in your country, like in many others, to gather their own resources as well. It's about taxation and other methodologies. So thank you very much for that introduction. Allow me to go now to the local level, from national level to local level, to the mayor of Rabat. I was just saying, the mayor of Rabat has been elected by a Congress hosting around 4,000 local and regional government members in Daejeon last week as part of our presidency. Mayor, we will be talking about these things a lot in the coming years. But now I would like to start with your perspective on how the work that we are doing with the observatory can support the conversations that you are having with other spheres of government and our work of advocacy. So the floor is yours, Mayor. À vous la parole.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Ms. Emilia Saiz. I'm particularly honored to be part of this meeting of the international group looking at the subnational governments, and I would like to thank the UCLG for giving us the opportunity. Now, of course, the forum gives us a large database and gives us the possibility to see what's happening in urban administrations and strengthen the different local players. Obviously, there are different players involved in the dialogue, and we have input from local citizens in local matters, which is important. We have a collection of good quality and good quantity of data, which helps us look at the local governments in different countries. And we can see at the observatory that there are exchanges between the different subnational governments, and we can see their success stories and also their failures, which means that we, in charge of the subnational governments, can do benchmarking and can avoid ending up in the worst situation and improve our actions. When we look at the role of the Observatory for the Sustainable Development Goals, it helps us speed up the implementation of global reports, for example, the Sustainable Development Agenda, the New Urban Agenda, the African Agenda for 2063, and of course the Paris Climate Accord. So I think all these reports can help us create value, and this is a way of making sure we have an equitable approach and a new model for inclusive and resilient development. But we must realize, Ms. Emilia Saiz, that to do this, well, to do this, we have to have participation from all players. You have to help them. Of course, the report provides us with information, but we need further information, and that's more detailed information, because sometimes we see contradictions, not in the report, but in the way we manage things on a daily basis. We can see contradictions when we want to present our budget, for example. You have to balance the budget. And if you don't balance the budget, then automatically the Treasury is going to reject that budget. And so we have to put expenditure and income and strike a balance. And if you don't have a balanced budget, then it won't be approved. So what happens is that we've got other expenditure which hasn't been programmed. Do you see what I'm getting at? So this is a limitation that we have to contend with. Being in charge of a subnational government, we have to manage these technical matters, and I think we need to find other solutions for that. Thank you very much.
You can really notice Mayor is an economist by education, a journalist by profession, and now a politician. So she's very much in this intersection of how to do things in a practical manner while transforming the model. And yes, we have tried, I'm certain we have tried to erase all contradictions in the report, but when you go to the country information, you find a lot of contradiction and a lot of information that are not there, and I see Dorothée nodding. A lot of information that are not there, and a lot of contradiction in the data that we have. And so this is true, and it is partially due also to the different ways that you can interpret some of this data and the tools that we need to use. So some food for thought for the second round, I would say. Allow me now to go to Marie-Hélène Loisson, Deputy Director General of the French Development Agency. You have been our partner in crime, I was going to say. It's not a crime, it's love, what we're doing here. So you've been our partner from the very beginning, and I'm just wondering, I mean, obviously, AFD is well known by its commitment to local and subnational levels. Your encouragement of decentralization and decentralized cooperation in many countries is really a very relevant input for the evolution of many country models around the world. So somehow I can understand why you were doing this, but could you tell us what triggered that in 2016, and if you see any differences with the now? How is it becoming relevant now for you? Please, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Merci. Bah, écoutez, je pense que
Thank you very much. When I think good marriages are based on shared values, and our marriage with the observatory started with a few basic ideas that we shared. First, as we saw in the initial presentation, there's the idea that subnational governments are a level where you are close to people, and this is essential. And it helps us understand the wide range and variety of the needs of local communities, what they need for infrastructure and services. And the second basic idea for us, given that our central idea at the AFD is to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, and here once again, subnational governments seem to us to be in the best position for concrete implementation of a number of national and international commitments for the SDGs. Either by working out national strategies as implemented at a local level, or looking at climate objectives and doing so in an innovative way in innovative areas. And because we're convinced of these ideas, and also I'll come back to the question of financing later, but over recent years this made it possible for us to work on advocacy with subnational governments, and we've done that with major international conferences in Addis Ababa, the COP21 in 2015, Habitat 3, and there we saw what a key role was played by development and the dealing with climate change, doing this with subnational governments and with obviously government and non-government organizations. And we did this very recently because just last week there was the Abidjan Summit of Finance in Common, and we supported the initiative called Finance Your Cities. And this was a conference which was done by the FMDV, and this was done with a joint financing initiative for resilient cities and countries, and this was to have a roadmap for better financing for climate at a local and regional level. So, as I said, the AFD's basic work is to provide financing, and all of this is done every year with around 3 billion euros in direct and indirect funding for local and regional authorities. So that's a quarter of our annual commitments. And as part of that, obviously, the observatory is an essential tool. It means that we can guide our work supporting subnational governments. We can collect quantitative data and also qualitative data, as we've seen, for example, on the way different countries organize themselves and do it with different levels of governance. And this provides us with input and greater knowledge of work being done in decentralization in the countries where we are working, because we try to adapt our financing and actions to local contexts and to the level of maturity, which of course can be very different. For decentralization, we have to match the financial and engineering capacities of the local authorities. To do this, we've developed a wide palette of instruments, and I'll give you some examples. Now, first, we have what we call public policy budget instruments, and we do this in a structural way. We do this to support decentralization, and we do this to support the financial resources available to local authorities. We've heard, of course, that this is a substantial need, and we need to have greater state transfers. We need to have a greater tax income and rates and human resources available to local authorities. And we usually do this in collaboration with other donors, so as we can enhance our work. And for example, we've done this in Senegal, Ethiopia, and Jordan. And we also have national program financing for priority financing in intermediate cities. And we've done this basically with technical assistance programs to improve the investment capacities of cities and the way they can do it with a project work, for example, in Cameroon, Madagascar, and Jordan. And it's also important when we're working with with local authorities, or sometimes with their operators for projects or investment programs, or sometimes there are policy credits with capacity for project financing and financial solidarity. And this is important because for a long time we were one of the only donors to provide direct financing for local authorities and project managers without a state guarantee. And over 15 years, that's around 3 billion euros that we directly loaned to local authorities in around 10 countries. For example, we do this in Balanquir in Colombia, Izmir in Turkey, and in the past we've had credit to Dakar, Ouagadougou, and Gadi in Ecuador. And we've also given lines of credit for public financing where there are specialized services in local government authorities, because this builds up their financing capacities, and they can do it for smaller cities. For example, we've done this with lines of credit in the DBSA in South Africa, the CPSCL in Tunisia, and the FEC in Morocco.
For these inputs, and actually I feel as if you have already been indicating some of the questions that we're going to raise in the second round about how this is affecting your portfolio. Because at the end of the day, all of this data, this analysis that we are doing, the key findings, they will need to affect our portfolio. And I would invite the public to start thinking about questions that you might have. I will take 2 questions that might influence the second round. So not comments, but actually questions after David Jackson's, the Director for Local Transformative Finance of UNCDF. David, I mean, I'm going to ask you the same question: why you have joined this work? But allow me to just shift it a bit. What do we need to promote by joining this work? And important things have come up already. Intermediary cities is very important, that development agencies are now understanding that intermediary cities play a critical role in the urban era. It took us a while to convince people to actually pay attention to that. It's not over, the fight is not over, we're getting there. But there is a new issue that I think, and I want to acknowledge the Secretary General of Metropolis, our metropolitan section here in the room. Some of the key findings that we have from this edition is that we need to think about new instruments, new models of governance, and metropolization will become a much more important part of our discussions in the coming years. But so will it need to be issues like resilience, and I also see the Secretary General of UCLG, ASPAC, they both are going to intervene later today, where an area of the world where resilience is extremely critical. So it's not only about green finance, it's not only about social services, but it's about a true shift of priorities, right? So David, from the perspective of UNCDF, why do we need to partner on this and get accurate data?
Well, thank you so much, Amelia. So I think from our perspective and why we've been involved from the beginning and what we need to promote, to your question specifically, I mean, we strongly believe that local government finance is development finance. So particularly for developing countries, and all countries in fact, it should be seen as a vector for addressing national development issues. It should not be seen as a niche for people who are policy nerds or wonks on local government or something like that. It should be seen as the main vector or a main vector for development finance. And so we would like OEC DAC, for example, to take this up as this is a big way you can deliver on your development finance. And it's great to say this following the intervention from AFD, because you're one of the institutions which has been taking that forward. So that's the reason why we've been involved, particularly for the least developed countries. And I'd like to come to 4 elements very quickly that illustrate this. I mean, you talked about public investment. We've seen about public investment. In the second round, I can come back to specific examples, but it can be often the most effective way of achieving public investments in some developing countries. And I'll give an example in the second round. Service delivery, but also crisis response. And I think we've learned that from the COVID. We've seen how actually localizing your crisis response is really the only way to do your crisis response. And then finally, climate adaptation. So climate adaptation is inherently local. It covers the mandates of local governments. It's all about water management, land use planning, either water drainage, storage, runoff management, etc. So really, climate adaptation, the vehicle has to be local government finance, but it's not. Climate adaptation ends up being implemented by ministries of environment, which are regulatory bodies, in these big, huge parallel projects, which are cumbersome and have many overheads. You've talked about the urbanization, you've talked about the urban-rural linkages, and for all these reasons, to conclude on this point, the data is critical. And for developing countries, and particularly the least developed countries where we work, it's actually a capacity building exercise. So you talked about the inconsistencies. Yes, they are there, but to be involved, if you're in Uganda, if you're in Senegal, in the WOFI data collection is a big thing. And you're comparing yourself with others. You're seeing yourself with others. And it builds your credibility, and you feel part of the wider universe, and you see how far you've got to go. So it helps put you on a path of the way for the way forward. So, but I completely agree with you, Amelia, that this report has to be seen as a vehicle for changing the way that national development policies are implemented and that development finance is channeled. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. You know, what you're saying also triggered, because we are all talking about key highlights of the next global agenda issues for next year. And next year, we're going to be having the great SDGs summit. We are not meeting the SDGs by far, and we need to rethink what we want after 2030. How does this information relate to that? But we're having the COP in a couple of weeks. And you know, for the first time, we are going to be able to, during Local and Regional Governments Day at COP on the 17th, we are going to be able to gather local government ministries at COP. That's a totally different perspective. Some of the challenges that we are facing with the acknowledgement of the needs and roles of the subnational level in global issues is that we often don't have the right interlocutor and the right data. And so I think this really relates on how we need to use that. I promised I would give the floor to 2 questions that could influence the next round. If I don't see any hands, you're shy. But if I don't see any hands, I will go to Carlo and to the governor, and we will come back to you. But this warm up, because otherwise I am known to choose volunteers. That's worse. So no, let us go to Carlo. Governor, what are your thoughts? Is there something on the findings that were presented by Lamia from what you have been able to read that struck you as something very relevant or that surprised you?
Well, what is quite surprising is, at the end of the day, the persistence of underfinancing of local authorities. I mean, this is a phenomenon that applies to a different extent, of course, globally, worldwide. And this is quite amazing, if you will, because there is a growing consensus, also at the national level, that really local communities, municipalities are at the forefront of crisis. COVID, climate change, but when we have migrants, at the end of the day, the buck stops with local authorities. So there is quite this, let's call it schizophrenia, between the fact that, hey, these are the actors that really solve the problems, address them, and address them fast. And on fast, I will want to add something later. And then on the other side, well, the money doesn't go there, or doesn't go there enough. So I believe that this raises quite interesting political economy issues, because let's face it, even the own resources of local authorities come from the right to raise the local taxes that is given at the national level. And this, by the way, also applies to federal states. So why would this political economy issue be addressed? This is very tricky, but it has to be addressed if we want, and when I say we, citizens, global citizens, if you will, how we want to address this crisis. And this will require recipes that applies to local system, but this fundamental political economy issue has to be addressed sooner or later. And yet another reason to do that is because during a crisis, resources have to be mobilized fast. And this is the experience that we at the Council of Europe Development Bank directly had during, for example, the COVID crisis. We wanted to have an impact fast. We are best known for the fact that being small have the advantage of being nimble, agile, fast. And in COVID was such an unexpected shock. We wanted to be able to have an impact and to have it fast before even, because for a larger institution it takes longer. Well, we realized that this had to be done using local authorities, either directly or just making sure that the resources that we provided at the national level would be channeled fast at the local level. And this is where we, as a bank, but also other international institutions, can make a difference in providing incentives and models to have a better relation between central government and national government as regards resources. And so let me conclude just echoing the issues that were discussed in Abidjan at the FIX summit, And there, our special focus, the Council of Europe Development Bank is just on social investment. We co-lead the coalition on social investment. Once again, the resources there are not sufficient, and the WOFI, with the database that it provides, with the fact that it can potentially evolve into a platform for analysis and benchmarking, can really make a difference.
Well, thank you very much, Governor. I mean, I will not hide from you. This is music to our ears, right? But I am biased because, of course, I represent a very concrete constituency. I have to confess that when I was reading the key findings for this year's edition, I was expecting a much greater increase in subnational expenditure, because we saw how local and regional governments had to develop all these new policies. But at the end of the day, what you see is that it has resorted it was a very specific moment, and then all of these resources are pulled back, and then the recovery plans are a very difficult space where everyone is in a battle to get those resources back. So while everybody is indeed understanding how important the flexibility of the local and subnational level is, there is a lot of hesitation to make that into a structural change, and I think this is the kind of a structural change that you're calling to. I still see no hands, so I'm going to go to the Mayor of Rabat again, and Mayor, the question now is. From what you have heard now, what strikes you most as most relevant of these findings, and how does it relate to the situation that you know well in Morocco? The floor is yours.
Merci, Madame Emilia. Donc, d'abord, on part du principe, tout ce qui n'est pas mesurable n'est pas...
Thank you very much, Madam. I think that we have to ensure that we have data so that we can manage the situation. And the data from WOFI gives us as politicians a sense that local government management needs to be not only administrative, we also need to ensure that local governments have both financial and administrative autonomy. Local governments need to be connected with central government. They need to be, so to speak, a branch of local government so that they can have expenses and act autonomously so as to develop our country. Now, when we look at the work of the observatory, we see that some keywords are expenditure and revenue. How can we transform an infranational government into a resource that's making profits? Because currently we're working very hard just to cover costs. Now, to talk of investment, we clearly need to have some profits, otherwise we would get into debt. Now, debt would mean borrowing money in order to spend. In Morocco, the interest rate is very high, and we're trying to change that. We've been trying to do so since our election. Now, we're doing that at the local governmental level in very concrete terms. Over a year now, we've had a certain number of achievements, but we're also working in collaboration with national authorities. Previously, at the local level, we couldn't access private loans, so we've exerted pressure. We've asked to be allowed to negotiate our own interest rates, and we've succeeded. So we've had a circular from the government that has permitted local governments to now borrow money from private actors, and we have a lower interest rate. It's under 7%. Now, I've just been elected, but my predecessors were very indebted, and I'm having to deal with that. I've got 45 million dirham to pay off this year. And that means that 49% of our budget, which is already going on salaried staff, is difficult to meet. Every day, I am taking very brave decisions, which I know are going to cause some issues, but I am convinced that we have to make progress in this area. Now, to come back to our staff, we have a large number of staff who are not very productive, so we need to cut back on the number of staff members. Now, at the international level, we need to increase taxation. We need to revise decrees on tax so that we can increase taxation, because for many years tax has not been increased, and this is very problematic. Consequently, our only income comes from tax and communal services, and from VAT to some extent, only a small amount. Consequently, we have quite limited income, and so we need to change tax policy. We have increased tax already. That has not been popular, but we didn't have the choice. And we've even created some new taxes. Let me give you an example. Currently, if an investor comes to Rabat to invest, he or she can invest in large-scale projects that require local assistance and monitoring. The person then needs to ask for a certificate for certification of the building, and this person only has to pay 10 euros to do this. So currently we've increased this tax. It's now 15 dirham per square meter of a building where a building is being built for a project. So that's a way for us to increase tax on these building projects led by investors. So since 2011, we've had a lot of reforms. We've increased regionalization and decentralization. In 2018, we also adopted a national decentralization charter for administration, and this will mobilize human capital. We also have a sustainable development strategy, which is carried out in cooperation with the UN. And we also have a Green Morocco project, which promotes youth and gender equality. And this is the first time that we've seen more women involved in our projects. More women are currently involved than men. This is very positive. We notice that in Europe, very often women are not given managerial positions, and luckily in Africa, that's not the case. We're actually making a great deal of progress with regard to gender equality. Excuse me, I'm being quite frank about this, but I'm quite proud about our progress. Now, we also have digitalization, digital transformation, and the state's made a great deal of efforts in this area. It's been encouraging us to provide more information so that we can digitalize our services, and we've even been given some funding for encouraging competition between different international governments. And the winner of this competition for financing has been given some additional incentives and rewards. Now, something else that's been very useful is our new developmental model. And this new model was created through a joint committee that included people from various social backgrounds. And then a study was carried out on the ground so that we could find out what the shortcomings were in the system. And thanks to the work of this committee, we've been able to develop this new developmental model, which is really a roadmap, and it sets out guidelines, methods, and goals. Thank you very much. Thank you to you for all this information.
Merci, parce que vous avez touché beaucoup de...
You covered a lot of aspects that I think the ambassador will also perhaps bring up.
The reform that is taking place in Chile right now, revenue is extremely important. how far can you go? I think Rabat is lucky that they are able to develop their own taxis. This does not happen all over the world. In fact, in most of the world, this is not possible. Ambassador, these new efforts that are being made at the level of decentralization with the regional level, that subnational level, getting a lot of importance, what are the main challenges that you identify there, and how do they relay with some of the findings that we have heard from this research?
Thank you, Emilia. In Chile, we have been discussing for many years and by piecemeal several decentralization reforms. We are a very centralized country, everything focused on Santiago, the capital, and the main sources of revenue in the country come from the national level. And then, of course, the problem that we have in Chile nowadays is that municipalities and regional governors are not able to take part or to participate in the decision-making on the not only on the revenue design, but also on the level of public expenditure. So they do not have political participation in the decision on taxation and public revenues. That has brought, or that has been framed under the problem of autonomy that has these two aspects, political and economical dimensions. I think that Carlo mentioned it, the mayor mentioned it. You have to have both at the end of the day, and the WOFI also makes some references to both dimensions of autonomy as something important at the local level. We went through several reforms over the years. Some of them have been trying to give more revenue to municipalities. Others were at the regional level, as Emilia was saying, with the governors, that were actually providing political autonomy, but believe it or not, there were no rules about financing the role of governors. So they do not have any capacity to decide on public revenue or public expenditure. So it's a sort of unfinished reform. All these problems, of course, had a expression in the constitutional debate that we're going through in Chile. That constitutional debate actually focused on the three dimensions that we're talking now. I was fortunate to take part as an advisor for the Constitutional Assembly on tax issues and the design of what they were trying to do. And believe it or not, if we had had the WOFI and those and at that moment, at least the one that we're seeing now, it would have been of great help. Mm-hmm. Why? Because the debate there, of course, focused on the revenue side. Why it was important to have money at the municipal and the regional level, but we didn't have the sort of evidence that we now provided on debt and public expenditure. So, from a tax perspective, and as you were saying, from a political economic perspective, it's not only necessary to have the power to tax, but it's also very important to have a very well-designed debt system at the local and the regional level, and at the same time to provide the institutional rules that can explain the way in which municipalities and, in our case, municipalities and regions are able to spend. Otherwise, there are responsibilities that are not well defined, and that can bring also a problem in the long term, not only for under-financed governments, but governments that may fall on debt. In that sense, and not to take a lot of time, I think that the reports, the report actually, or the conclusions of the report are very important, especially when they talk about the balance between responsibility and resources. That is a good point. But But the most important for me, at least when I was reading it, and because of what I was telling about the constitutional reform, and the way in which different actors express their demands, one of the most important lessons is that between the allocation of resources, but also on collaboration. I think it's very, very important that conclusion or that information that the WOFI provides, especially because we are supposed to go to a decentralized system, and they require a level of collaboration not only at the moment of deciding on the revenue, but also when establishing certain solidarity rules. If we focus only on the local level, what might happen, as it would happen in Chile, for example, is that you are focused on getting revenue for economic activity that actually is very identified with the region, for example, copper regions, or with the exploitation of natural resources. But then if you don't have solidarity and redistributive rules, the problem that we are having, and that was part of the discussion in the constitutional debate that we're having and will come again, is that we will have rich communities and very poor communities. And actually that is not good also for the country. So I think that with all this information and with some of the recommendations, we will be able to have a better discussion in Chile. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I was remembering the governor of Bio that was part of the delegation that visited, pointed out exactly this when we discussed the observatory, said, I wish I would have had this sooner in some of the debates that are taking place, but I think we are still on time. Thank you also for bringing the issue of solidarity, because one of the findings from the report is also that we will need to go to more asymmetric models. We will not be able to define rules that are one and the same for everyone, but I think the issue of solidarity will be extremely relevant. And the other issue, which I hope we will be able to address now, is, well, it's about a financial system that is defined at national level, for sure, but we will also need to address access to finance, international access to finance, also at subnational level at some point, because the type of infrastructure that we are going to need to address many of the shocks that are facing, that we are facing, will necessitate of additional financing. So I am going now to the Deputy Director of the French Development Agency again, Marie-Hélène. You have started to share with us how the work at the observatory is also influencing the type of investment that you are doing. What do you see now for the coming years? Obviously, the findings of this edition do not actually include the impact of the war. And it doesn't include, you know, the food system shock, the energy shock. But what do you see now in the coming period?
Tout d'abord, laissez-moi remercier Madame la maire de Rabat pour.
First of all, thank you very much to the Mayor of Morocco for advocating for gender equality. I think that's a wonderful thing in Morocco. Thank you very much for that information. Now, I think that what we find in the report, and you've said this yourself, and I think we've all mentioned it, and certainly, as you've said, we have these various crises and their effects. But what I've noticed in the report is that local or subnational governments have faced a number of major issues, but they've continued functioning throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. We've put in place special measures locally that have complemented central government measures. So really, the pandemic demonstrated how we need to coordinate different governmental levels, because we needed strong decisions to be taken quickly at the central level, but also at the local level. And the local level has had to adapt very quickly to the crisis and to local needs resulting from the crisis.
Déjà auparavant, mais encore plus aujourd'hui, par exemple,
Now, currently,
régional ou aux villes intermédiaires.
local governments and intermediary cities, capital cities are being helped, for example, in Cameroon and in India. And in order to help local governments there, we're working initially with central government. We're trying to instate dialogue between local and central government so that changes can be made. Another important point in the report, we've talked about the statistics. We've noticed that local governments are playing a greater role in financing and investment, but perhaps not as much as we would like. And indeed, there's still a major discrepancy between North and South.
Des processus de décentralisation.
We're seeing some decentralization, but not to the same extent everywhere. And some financial actors are a little reluctant to support local governments.
Stratégie des financeurs.
Now, that could be improved by putting in place some new financial strategies, but it could also be improved by increasing decentralization and by strengthening local governments and giving them more financial means. We can also help them to manage investment programs. And the mayor of Rabat mentioned this. We perhaps need to improve human resources
leurs compétences.
By upskilling. We're supporting a program in Senegal to help local governments and regions. This is the PACA-SEN program, which is part of the third stage of decentralization in Senegal. And through this program, we're trying to make local governments stronger. So we're supporting institutional reform. And we're trying to increase financial resources and provide local actors with better human resources who have financial and administrative skills to be able to plan investments and lead projects. So these are very structural changes. Through this program, we're also trying to put in place a local framework for planning, implementing and supporting infrastructure for economic development. And finally, we're also trying to improve local public services by increasing funding for local government. Now, something else that is very important in order to strengthen local government, I mentioned this earlier, is encouraging local banks to work with local government. So here again, we're trying to mediate between different actors. And this year, for example, we signed with the European Commission a mechanism called CityRees, which provides local private banks with guarantees when they lend money to local governments. The program covers 50% of the loan, and there's a mechanism for covering any initial losses. So we hope that this will encourage banks to help local governments more. Now, I've mentioned structural changes, and we're also trying to introduce some programs to build capacity for engineering projects. We have a program in Africa called CICLIA, which is a mechanism to help to build low-carbon projects. We've helped 39 African cities. We're supporting infrastructure projects to a level of around 60 million euros. So these are very targeted programs that are really ways to accelerate investment in local projects. Finally, we're also trying to help local governance through work with development banks in Africa and Latin America. Like the observatory, we're trying to encourage the sharing of good practice and the sharing of tools to help public banks to have a greater focus on local projects.
C'est leur proximité.
Because again, local governments are very are aware of citizens' needs, and I think that they can work closely with citizens to try and achieve the SDGs.
My volunteer is going to be Daria Chibrayo. I am going to ask you to intervene after David because I want to have the vision of the unions. I think we cannot close this panel without bringing the vision of the unions. Public Service International is a critical partner to all of our work, and increasingly we should be looking into this data together. So a couple of minutes for you to think about what you want to leave us with, because we have touched upon the staffing as well, and salaries, what they imply for subnational governments. So your thoughts are very welcome. David, what are the most striking numbers for you in this edition? What are you concerned about most? Do you agree with me that increase that we have seen is not the kind of increase that we had expected to see, or how are you looking at it?
You know, totally. I think you can see clearly the drop in own source revenue. This was highlighted in the presentation as a result of COVID, and it hasn't really bounced back yet. And I think there are also some structural economic changes that are harming the local receipts. There's the move to online platforms, for example, that are taking the classical bricks and mortar and kind of marketplaces away. So I think local governments have real challenges now in raising revenue. And central governments often like to restrict their ability to do so because they would like to raise the revenue themselves. So I think that really does come out of the report, the decline in own source revenue. And then the increase in expenditures was simply good in the sense that it was using local governments as a vehicle for transfers during the emergency. But sadly then there was a kind of move back, because rather than say, right, we've now discovered this is our platform, we should use local governments more. So that's what struck me out from the report. But I think there's also hopeful signs, because you can see that in terms of the intergovernmental fiscal transfer systems, these are fundamental parts of national expenditure. And this is a very important advocacy tool, because ministers of finance often think that, you know, when you make a transfer to a local government, you're kind of throwing money away. No, you're investing in your national territory. It's not something to do reluctantly, it's something to do joyfully. And we have to people don't get that yet. And I think that's why this mantra, you know, local government finance is actually development finance, and particularly when it comes to climate adaptation. And I hope moving forwards we can start perhaps to disaggregate local climate finance. There's what we're going to advocate for this COP is that there's a 30-country mechanism which is really driven by local governments, and it's 30 countries and growing, and we would like this to become a non-market approach under Article 6.8, which means that there will be, for the first time ever, an actual vehicle, a formal vehicle for climate adaptation, and specifically adaptation through local governments, which is logical. That's the logical way forwards. I think the other element, asset management, we talked about the own source revenue, but asset management is very important. With UNDESA, we have trained 3,000 local government staff in asset management. There's a handbook now, a global handbook on local government asset management, and that's actually 70% of the infrastructure cost. And local governments are not really using that as a source of revenue. You can actually have really great assets, but you can use them as a source of revenue in a citizen-friendly way. And I think the other things that come out of it is, you know, there still needs to be a lot more of this domestic capital market reform. There's still not enough local government access to domestic capital markets. And the advantage of that is that you don't have the exchange rate risks, and you don't have the kind of perception of risk when you're accessing international capital. In Tanzania, for example, we finally managed to persuade the Securities and Exchange Commission to allow a local government to issue a bond, a water bond, an infrastructure bond on the domestic stock exchange. And it's going to be purchased by pension funds, by Tanzanian pension funds. So it's all in Tanzanian shillings. That'll be $23 million, but that's the kind of thing that has to happen across the country. And to your point earlier about investments, I mean, it's clear that a government on its own balance sheet will never be able to borrow enough for these intermediary cities to be able to make the investments that they need. So there has to be other ways around it. In addition to domestic capital markets, I think we need city-friendly investment funds. And one that we've created together with UCLG, the International Municipal Investment Fund, has a particular model of equity. So they don't lend money. They basically own the public transport system, let's say a tramway system, and they mitigate their risk basically by owning it. So there's pros and cons of that, but a pro is you get your tramway system. So, but we have to make sure it's city-friendly. And to me, this is the danger in this access to capital and bankable projects. It's not only about just creating a pipeline of bankable projects on the terms of the banks. It's about creating transformative investments on the terms of the local governments. And you mentioned earlier about the interest rates. So one of the things we managed to do with Chef Chouin in Morocco, actually, is lend to Chef Chouin at a 0% interest rate. And they're going to install solar lighting, and they will repay the loan with the electricity bill savings made from the solar lighting. So it seems to me that kind of process has to become more expansive. When one talks about, you know, the financing for development agenda, moving from funding to financing, that didn't mean moving from funding to predatory financing. It means moving from funding to financing. So I think we have to have these city-friendly funds. And then finally, guarantees are very, very important because one of the obstacles that's holding this whole thing back is the IMF rules on public finance. So in the IMF rule book, basically any public debt, even a debt by a local government, counts as part of the national. And that's why they're very nervous to expand this. But there has to be a way to mitigate against that. And we're working together with Sweden, who have agreed to use their national treasury balance sheet to guarantee some local government investments and to defray that liability on the sovereign. And this week, in fact, we in Brussels, because the European Union have also opened up a guarantee fund with an urban window. And we hope to be able to access $200 million from that to use for the same purpose. And once you start getting these mechanisms around, then it makes it much easier for local governments to open up the city-friendly investments that we're talking about, rather than simply thinking of it as a pipeline of projects to international investors at high rates. So I think there's a lot to be done, but we're slowly getting there. And I believe that the crisis that we face, forgetting about temporarily about the war, the migration crisis, but the climate crisis that we face means that people will have to see that it's local investments that are the way forwards, because that's the only way to do it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, David. Very, very important notions here. I think, unfortunately, what the war is triggering is what the climate emergency was already indicating to us. And it's very hard to detach these two things, because simply the kind of dependency that we had was not smart. And part of defining city-friendly financing is about redefining what is profitable, what is bankable, right? And what is transformative? Where is the transformation that we want to finance? So thank you for bringing that back. We should have finished by now. We are going to have coffee at until 12. I'm going to give the floor to Daria, and then if you have any comments of 1 minute just to leave with the room, I would welcome you to do that. Daria.
Well, thank you very much, Emilia, and thanks to the panelists for the very important and informative discussion. We appreciate very much that you give us the floor. So I represent Public Services International, which is the global trade union federation representing employees, workers in public services worldwide. We're present in over 154 countries and represent over 30 million women, especially, and men who deliver services which are life-saving and have been proved to be life-saving during COVID every day. So we're basically the employees, the workers of local authorities. Thank you for having brought up a number of important issues. Let me just try to be very brief, but make a few points. And again, Emilia, thanks for bringing up the issue of public service workers whenever and wherever you are. We very much appreciate that. I think PSI and UCLG are in together in this. If I'm here today, it's because public finance for local government is recognized by our constituency as well, not only by UCLG, the local authorities, for being key, not only to public services delivery, but how those services can and should be delivered, which means in decent working conditions, because the quality and the resilience of public service delivery, especially at times of crisis, is closely linked to the quality working conditions that people who are supposed to deliver those services are in. So let me just make a couple of key comments. I think that from our perspective, we're very interested in the role of public banks, and so and the potential that they represent to fund and enhance access to quality funding for social purposes for local authorities. So we're very pleased to hear that the AFD is working on this, but also Council of Europe. We would be very pleased to also discuss with you and be part of the conversation. One aspect that perhaps has not been put on the table, but we believe it should, it has been touched upon in a way by His Excellency, the Ambassador of Chile, is the issue of tax justice for local authorities. Because there's 2 points, 2 aspects of this. One is the participation of local authorities in the decision or in the shaping of the tax system. But there's a second level here. I mean, there's trillions of tax which are lost and not recovered. But usually it's only central governments that can recover the lost tax. But then once, even when the tax is recovered, the corporate tax is recovered, there must be a channeling of a fair share of tax back to the territories, which, for instance, for large corporations, the ambassador mentioned copper, for example, extractive companies, companies which actually deplete the environment, but also sometimes just produce good products and services. They're always anchored in a specific community, in a specific territory. They use public resources, they use public services, they use the local knowledge and the local workforce. So they must be part of the negotiations that define the treaties of settlement of multinational corporations. Local authorities must be at the table. And I know that in the OECD, last year there has been the recommendation issued for a unitary corporate tax as a minimum of 15%. We believe this should be increased, also because there's a looming debt for not only countries but also local authorities over the past, where there's a lot of tax lost over the past decades. With that, I would like to close with one more consideration. Of course, local authorities must balance their budgets and must be financially viable, but we very much insist on the fact that cities are not companies. Cities are not for profit, are for people to live in. So we must also collectively think of ways to actually make exception or consider city and local authority budgets in a different perspective than just the private sector. These are social economies. When we invest in infrastructure, it's not just a cost, it is an investment in the future. And let me also remind everyone here that it's great to invest in big infrastructures, schools, hospitals, bridges, roads, parking lots, etc. But if there are no people to implement and deliver those services, to operate those infrastructures, there's no use. So any budget must include a fair provision for workers in decent conditions, otherwise you will have a desertification of your territories and there will be no development and no inclusion. Thank you very much for this space and congratulations for this very important report which serves also a lot of our goals.
Thank you very much, Daria. A well-deserved applause. I mean, look around you. There are very many parts of the world, including Europe, that are not finding workers. If you arrive in the airport, in the huge hub airport of Schiphol, you can't wait for 2 hours because there is no availability to, you know, to make the jetway ready or to deal with your luggage. This happens in all types of jobs, including highly educated jobs, and it's part of what you're saying is about redefining profitability. And maybe in the Pact for the Future that we have just adopted in the IJON as local and regional governments, what we are saying is that it might mean promoting a universal quality of life with a different essential metric to that of GDP. We might not be able to keep redefining development around GDP, and that is something that we all need to think together about. It's very much part of this discussion. Governor, any thoughts in 1 minute?
Well, the very rich discussion that we had, and I'm really grateful for the fact that I learned a lot today, has shown that WOFI is a great instrument. Now, it's a great instrument, it can be used more.
Yeah.
That's to me the key finding that is emerging from this discussion. It can be used more to make it more of a flat platform for exchange, for benchmarking, for sharing common experiences, and really to use it to transform in a better way the key contribution that local communities can give to the daunting challenges that we face, starting, of course, with the climate change.
Well, thank you very much. Do I see any other hands from the speakers? Yes, please, Ambassador, go ahead.
Thank you. Just very, very quick remarks. I want to thank you all again. I think the WOFI brings fantastic opportunities, as we were discussing today, bringing together all the relevant actors to discuss and collaborate with the same data is very important because it provides a common grammar. I think that we have very different backgrounds, but the grammar is very important, and that is what WOFI and the data does. At the same time, I also had some comments for the next editions, maybe, starting from David's last remarks and Nadia's comments that I really thank and appreciate. If I got your name right, Nadia, no?
Daria.
Ah, Radia, okay, sorry. But for the next editions, I was hoping to see something about debt levels at the local dimension, especially because of the consequences that this might have at the macroeconomic level on the whole country. So I think what David was saying on that is very, very important, and there's a lot of research to be done. Also, fiscal competition. I think that fiscal competition, to show it, to measure it, we know in the US, for example, the effects of Delaware, and in several other countries, that also brings some important and relevant information. And finally, just to say that it's great to have this evidence, and would be good to have perhaps a little bit more information for the future. I know this is difficult, but we are also trying to provide new ideas on which mechanisms you think work better to provide public services and for the administration of resources, especially the institutional design of them. Institutional design is very helpful because it can be translated into data, and that can also provide some benchmark for countries that want to do some reforms. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Now that we have this acquis of 3 reports, that we can compare that data, that is a robust analysis that we have, we are also thinking about how to start using this in our learning agenda, in our learning processes. I think that local government associations need to play a bigger role in identifying and analyzing this data, what it means for the different countries. So it's certainly something that we can think about, and I think there will be sessions throughout the day that will be looking into some of these issues. Let us not forget that the ecosystem of organized local and regional governments, constituency and partners is large, and that we are using this data in many parts of the world, but we have taken good notes of your recommendations. Any other hands? So I go to David, then you will wrap it up. David.
No, thank you very much indeed. Cities are not companies. I think that's a great statement. And whilst we do live in a world of nation states, and that's that's the principal political organization of the world, cities and local governments are units of social organization, and they're units of political representation. And if we go back to the principles of subsidiarity, we should be able to see that a document like WOFI, moving forward, should be able to change the way that we look at these units of social organization, these units of political representation. Yes, we have countries that they're never going to go away, but let's look at these units of social organization through the lens of subsidiarity and see them as the actual way forward to address a lot of the challenges that the world is facing. And I don't think we're quite there yet. Not everybody gets that. But I think this report can help to take us in that direction.
Well, thank you very much, David. Marie-Hélène?
Merci. Quelques derniers petits mots, effectivement, d'une part.
Well, thank you very much. A few words. Thank you, Daria, for your statement, which clearly illustrates some of the issues that have been raised today, especially the fact that it is quite crucial for local authorities to have the resources they need for the staff to be able to deliver on public services with the competent and skilled staff. So the dialogue is very important, and we have to decide about the distribution of resources at which level and according to which objective. What we intend to do in the future, I'm referring to AFD, we're going to provide support to all stakeholders in SDGs pursuit. How can local authorities can make sure that their programs are in line with the achievement of SDGs. That applies, of course, to local authorities, and we're working on green budgeting. It's a subject which is still in discussion. We have to, because it requires analyzing the spending and the purpose of such spending. This is something we'd like to work on more precisely, and would like to be able to do that on the basis of case studies. So this is something that, this is some work we're going to continue. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I think that in the future editions, we should discuss how we can achieve the objectives of digitization in all sectors of government at all levels in order to improve and facilitate our citizens' life, but also in order for local authorities to gain in efficiency. And I think that we should develop a roadmap for local authorities so that renewable energies can be more widely adopted in the cities, which will result in a reduction in their energy, in the energy bill, and also it would mean fulfilling on delivering on our commitments vis-à-vis the Paris Agreement.
The task of this roundtable was to open up the conversations that are going to follow throughout the days. I think the objective is met. We are going to have coffee until 12 sharp. Sorry for doing such a bad 15 minutes of coffee. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you.